I need to get something off my chest, because if I don't, I fear I'll be asked about the subject literally hundreds of times more. People have been asking when I'll LP Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, what I thought about the game, or some combination thereof. Long story short, guys, unless something drastically changes my opinion of the game, I'm never going to LP it. And this is for a multitude of reasons, king of which is something I'm sure plenty of people are going to complain about, or just outright slam me for. I don't find the game interesting, not in the slightest. To let you guys know what I mean, I'd have to take you back literally years ago when the Wii Motion Plus peripheral was released. And the minute I saw it in Wii Sports Resort, I had a dreaded feeling in the back of my mind that, the fencing minigame in Wii Sports Resort would be the blueprint for combat in the next Zelda game. In fact, when the concept of the Wii was revealed back in 04, 05 with the motion controls, so many people were excited at the idea of being more in tune with Link than ever before. Being able to be in control of your sword play and being able to aim things like your bow, just like Link would. Except not at all, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Of course, when the Wii was actually released, the controller we got was essentially incomplete, being limited to primitive wiggling and nunchuck controls, and would remain such for several years until the Motion Plus was actually released in '08. In fact, so many people harped on the Wii for this, but in my opinion, the games with this limited motion control still left the game with a traditional controller feel. The motion just added to the game, it didn't define it. Great example, Metroid Prime 3. The motion controls in that game were just enough to add to the immersion of the experience without feeling forced down your throat. All you did was aim and do a couple of mini-games that involved thrusting or turning your hand in certain directions to, open doors and solve puzzles. Like I said, and remember this quote, the motion added to the game, it didn't define it. I'd consider Twilight Princess the same way, despite the fact that the game itself is just a Wii port of a GameCube game through and through. In fact, what it did was it made a lot of the complex button combinations for Link's sword techniques easier to accomplish, in my opinion. Which is good, because the focal point of the Zelda series has never been combat. Yes, it's had some pretty cool bosses, but the focal point of the series has been its overworld, dungeons, and puzzle solving. Combat was just a small aspect when you consider the game gives you enough control to keep you interested, but not so much control that it seemed like a chore just to kill simple enemies. It's with this basic idea of the Zelda series that I let you all know right now. I'm a big fan of the series. It's definitely on my top 5 best video game franchises of all time. There's a difference between being a fan and being a fanatic, or a fanboy, if you will. A very big difference. For example, are you outraged when a reviewer gives Zelda a high but not perfect score, to the point where you'll send hate mail or just trash the reviewer for having their opinion on the game? Do you automatically buy every game that comes in a series without knowing, without experiencing the game firsthand, just as a way of testing the water? Take a look in the mirror, and what you'll see is a fanboy. I, for one, have never been so blinded by my love for a series that it skews my opinion on what good game design is, especially for an established series like Zelda. In fact, I've told you guys many times my favorite series is Metroid, and I don't like Other M. But nor have I ever been so insecure about my love for a game that it lets the opinions of others actually matter to me. So all that aside, the fact is, I'm letting you guys know in advance that I have a strong attachment to the Zelda series. I'm not some blind hater, nor am I some fanboy who will instantly tout a Zelda game as an instant classic. All that aside, I really don't like Skyward Sword, and I couldn't be less interested in actually playing through the whole game. I sat in front of a demo for damn near half an hour, trying to wrap my head around what Nintendo was thinking when they designed this game from the ground up, all around this required-to-play peripheral of the game. The Motion Plus. I've never owned a Motion Plus, and odds are, if this is the most notable game that actually makes use of it, I never will. Which means that I'm not going to be buying a game I can't even play without it. Combat's become less of a background task that the game will use to pad dungeon time in between puzzles, and it's become the focal point of the game. Clunky, uninteresting combat where the enemies themselves have pretty much become puzzles. Every single enemy in this game requires you to study and learn some tactic that you have to do to kill them. All the way down to the dumbass bokoblins with nothing but a sword to block you, and skulltulas that you have to flip with your sword in order to hit their soft spot. Sounds cool on paper, right? Well, we're ignoring what I said earlier in that combat's never been the focal point of the Zelda series, despite one of its biggest symbols being the sword and shield. But it's welcome to see them try and evolve the gameplay into something different than what's been established for the past 14 years since OOT. But this, well, it sounds cool on paper, it devolves into nothing more than a motion gimmick for everything that moves. They've basically made it so that Link can't do much beyond what your motion limitations say he can do. He holds none of the grace or finesse with the sword that he held in Twilight Princess, and this is the game in the series that pretty much establishes that Link, in all of his incarnations, is a young man with the eternal soul of a natural warrior. Where he and enemies like the Dark Knight and Twilight Princess have talented swordplay that you can access with button presses. The combat in Skyward Sword is ridiculously slow, clumsy, and looks absurd as you and your enemies mindlessly alternate your guard and stance as you try and get them. The combat in this game feels so slowed down by this gimmick. Now, I say slowed down because the enemies take forever to actually try any offense against you. And when they actually do, their attacks are so delayed that even your grandmother would have the reflexes to dodge it. Combat in Twilight Princess, though simplistic because it actually used a controller setup with next to no emphasis on motion gimmicks, actually felt dangerous against certain enemies, because if you didn't have the reflexes to parry or counter at just the right time, you'd get nailed for some damage. At the same time, it was intuitive enough to actually pick the game up and know what to do without a lot of practice. Whereas here in Skyward Sword, every enemy takes forever to study and see what motion works. And even if you know what you're doing, combat just feels so forced and so slow that it really detracts from the game's appeal, while capturing none of the suspense that previous Zeldas might have had with combat because the enemies waste all their time trying to block you. That's of course assuming the motion works flawlessly for you. The problem with a game relying on motion controls almost exclusively is that it has none of the precision of a simple button press. Human or technical errors might happen and you might fudge up an execution, or the sensor bar might even not register your movements. No good game with a traditional controller has this problem. It'd be the equivalent of a button press not registering. And when you have a game that operates almost entirely on this gimmick of the Motion Plus, you're likely to encounter that a lot. That's why so many of the games on the Wii that I do enjoy have either the GameCube controller option or their reliance on the motion gimmick is so limited that it doesn't detract from the game. The only way to precisely play a game like this is if you have a 4 to 6 foot bubble of nothing but air around you. Otherwise, you're going to be careful trying not to stub your toe on a coffee table or accidentally smash something fragile while swinging your arms around like an idiot. Me? I have a small area to actually play games, which makes a high-maintenance game like this a huge turn-off for me. And that's just scratching the surface of this gimmick of a game. Nearly everything relies on this. Using bombs, the new beetle item, or even the atrociously boring process of flying from place to place. The Great Sea was a goldmine compared to this big mass of nothing. You know, the story is alright, but it's standard for a Zelda game. I've done myself the liberty of spoiling the game's story and ending so I don't have to play it, and the story itself is just kind of blah to me. The fact that Link is chasing after Zelda from place to place sounds like an awfully familiar and painful process of your princess is in another castle. And Douche Baba Ganoush in this game, otherwise known as Girahim, is one of the most useless villains of all time. In fact, until the end of the game, he accomplishes zero. He carries none of the air of a villain that Ganondorf did. He toys with you while you fight, and yet he wonders why you kick his ass every time. Ganondorf was a tyrant who conquered Hyrule in OOT, and even in his other incarnations he's known as a villain to be feared. Girahim's level of infamy is non-existent. Either nobody knows who he is, or nobody cares, because he's a useless waste of time every time he's on camera. The one good thing about him is that he basically makes Vaati look 10 times better and more effective as a villain compared to Ganondorf. So thank you, Garahim. Thank you for actually making one of the most underrated villains in Nintendo history, Vaati, look better to the fanbase. Seriously, guys, the game is a huge time sink to actually play. The plot and dungeon progression is so slow that it takes forever before you actually feel like you're making any progress. And aside from graphical and sound quality, something else in the series does everything better. The only people who would actually have the patience to stick through the experience from start to finish would be hardcore Zelda fans. And if you're asking me for a Let's Play on it, odds are you have the game and have beaten it. And if you enjoyed it, good on you. You don't have to take my opinion on the game as gospel. But the odds of me ever LPing the game are almost non-existent. Most of my commentary would be me complaining about the overabundance of motion controls. It's ironic when a game relies on a gimmick whose very purpose is immersion and getting you more in tune with the game. Yet it's so limiting that it actually makes you feel less immersed in the game. You are limited to your controls as a human being. You can't do any of the flashy stuff that Link can do. And so, in this game, Link can't do any of the flashy stuff that Link used to be able to do. So no, guys, I'm not going to LP the game. In fact, the odds of me spending the $70 to actually get it and Emotion Plus are almost just as bad. Sorry, guys. This is probably the one Zelda game I'm not going to mind passing up. So, on that note, have a good day, everybody.